So we've got this tiny nook in our basement bathroom, and it's perfect for some shelves. So I'm going to build some quick shelves, and I'm going to show you exactly what I did to do it. I had some plywood. I've been building some other shelves, and these are just some offcuts from that. So I started with ripping some pieces that are 3.5 inches wide. And these are going to be the supports that hold the shelves. Since it's a bunch of repeat cuts, I set up a stop block and cut all the same size pieces together. And then reset the stop block for the other size that I had to cut. I usually try, after the first cut, when setting a stop block, to remeasure and make sure that it's the right size, just to double check. Decided on the front edge of these supports, I wanted to put a bevel. So I just used the same stop block and chopped the end off of each board. That just makes the transition a little nicer. Alright, support's done. I've got these little guys all over the place. Then a whole bunch of sanding, which nobody likes to do and nobody likes watching it. And then a whole bunch of painting. Same thing. Then I cut down the pieces that are going to be the actual shelves. Now, you have a piece that's wider than your saw can cut. It's pretty easy to make the cut as far as you can one way, and then flip that board over. Line it up and just continue the cut. This piece was too big for my table saw sled, so this is how I had to cut it. Doing this actually prompted me to bolt down my miter saw because it was moving. Nothing to it. I decided to put a chamfer on the front edge of each shelf just to add a little better profile to it, and also make it to where as you put things on and off the shelf, there's not that sharp edge just hanging out there. More sanding. I wanted to break down the edges on the shelves so they weren't sharp and splittery. It's always a good idea with plywood, or any wood. And more painting. I found this little roller head laying around, and it actually made it go so much faster. Now this is oak veneered plywood, and it was a bad choice because the grain is definitely going to show. I didn't think about the porous grain and that my wife wouldn't like that. She would much rather they be very smooth. So some sanded plywood or even MDF might have been a better choice. Although in the bathroom where the moisture is, MDF might have been a bad call. You notice I did not paint edges on these. I painted the bottom edge of the supports, but not the backs or the sides of the shelves. And that's because you're never going to see them. They're going to be against the wall. So in the bathroom, the first thing I did in that cubby hole is measure and try to space where I wanted those shelves to be and mark that on the wall. The marks I put were going to be where the bottom of the shelf was going to rest. And I wanted to space them to where they were decent spaced and have enough room on the shelf and to use the space evenly. I bought this cheap stud finder to find the studs in the walls, and the studs did not end up being where I wanted them to be, or even in a good place for these shelves, so I had to kind of work around it. I chose cabinet screws to do this, and that ended up being a terrible mistake because they don't really countersink, they don't sit flush, I pre-drilled the screws so they wouldn't split, but those cabinet screws did not sit well. They stick out too far, and I'm really unhappy with it, so keep that in mind as you choose your screws. Something tapered that will countersink a little better. As you can see, it's ugly, ugly, ugly. So I painted the screw heads and touched everything up, and it looks a little better that way. I'm still not thrilled with it. I wish I'd never used those screws. Another mistake I made was the bottom 4 shelves are deeper shelves than the top 2, and I actually cut them 1.5 inches too shallow because they're supposed to come out just past the end of those beveled supports. So I cut some 1.5 inch spacers and put them in the back. You probably won't really see them too much once the shelves are covered with things, but that was a mistake that I had to correct. And here I'll need to touch up some paint. Now, as you can see, there are some gaps between the wall and the shelves. And we're going to use caulk and fill that in and make them integrate into the walls a little better. And you just run a light bead, don't use too much, but run a light bead around it. And I tried to also caulk the seam between the filler piece and the shelf, and it didn't work out too well. I like to use baby butt wipes because they're wet and disposable and allow you to just run right along that bead and fold it over and keep going. Because the idea is you take your bead and you kind of smooth it into the crack, and it just makes a nice transition. If you need to add a little more because there's a gap still, add a little more and re-wipe it again. Some people put tape down to define where the caulk will go and won't go. This is why you wear gloves. It's hard to wash off. But as you can see, once the caulk is in, the shelves look much more integrated into the wall and a much better finish. After the caulk dries, you can touch it up with paint if you need to, if it doesn't match too well. If this helped, let me know in the comments. I appreciate it. Thanks for watching.